You know, I've never been a fan of the console wars. I never really saw the point to compare blast processing or any specs to prove a video game system is better. If it's fun, it's fun. If the Super Nintendo's fun, it's good enough for me and I'll play it. If the Sega Genesis is fun, it's good enough for me and I'll play it. Well, naturally, sometimes kids grow up with more video game systems more than others, meaning when you plant that nostalgia seed, it's going to grow and blossom out nicely and you're going to develop a lot of feelings and care into it over time. Since my parents bought the Sega Genesis games when I was 5 years old, I guess we know the story from there. So I went with 10 entries, then I felt bad not to include some, so it went up to 20, and then to 25. There's so much I want to show that I won't allow 10. I guess the only rule I have is that these are my top 25 personal Sega Genesis games I love to play today, and how well they aged since then from my childhood. So that's simple enough. Let's get started. Have you ever grown up and played that childhood video game you knew was flawed, but you played it anyways? Alex Kidd is that game, which is why it's number 25. Even though I find myself playing this game more than I should, I admit it has problems. It has shallow hitboxes, annoying enemy placement, and it has rock, paper, scissors, which means luck-based events and bosses. And let me finish in saying the last 3 levels are completely idiotic, even turning me away and finishing the game nowadays. The only things going for this game for me is really the nostalgic and charm, which makes me come back for it. Alex Kidd is a unique game in that you have a large amount of items you can pull out of your pocket, but even then they're not very practical. So my best advice is that if the game looks cool, give it a shot. But it definitely hasn't aged that well, so proceed with caution if you don't have that same childhood nostalgia I do in enjoying it. If you love Contra, get this game now. I mean it. Drop your keyboard and controller, stop everything you're doing, and go hunt this game down. The customization of weapons is what makes this beast purr. How it works is that there are 4 elements, but you can combine 2 elements at once into your weapon to experiment with and find your playing style. Choose carefully, because each weapon combo has their strengths and weaknesses, so play to your strengths and work out which weaknesses you can cope with from your favorite. Other brilliant positives: intense boss fights. You get clusters of enemies to annihilate. It has a 2-player system. You get health, which Contra doesn't do. You can grab enemies and toss them if they get up close and personal. Definitely a great time. So why is it number 24 for me? It's criminally short, which means when I was done with it, it left a big gaping hole of disappointment in me. It has quality over quantity scribbled all over it. Why, Slashstar? How could you do this to me? How could you put Sonic the Hedgehog 2 at number 23? Well, first, I played it too much in my lifetime like Ocarina of Time. I'm frankly very tired of it. However, the other 2 Sonic games are way further up on this list. So how to explain that? I find the zones and music way more unmemorable compared to the other 2 games. Why? It's called personal taste. Everybody has them and nobody can do anything about that. This game's charm happened to wear off faster than the other 2. I don't really have a criticism of the game, and I know a few viewers might assume I'm committing the ultimate sin putting the game this low, but it's not because of anything negative at all. It's an awesome and very well built game. Think about it this way, I love and adore all 25 of these Sega Genesis games a lot, and I mean a lot, like children love their teddy bears. And so it comes down to, out of 25 outstanding Sega Genesis games, if I find 22 Sega Genesis games funner than Sonic the Hedgehog 2, it's going to be my number 23. And that's all there is to it. Believe it or not, movie tie-in games were a lot more put together back in the old days. Well, mostly. Because let's face it, earlier game consoles were way easier to program games for back then. I have to admit, Toy Story probably has the smoothest animation quality I've ever seen on the Sega Genesis. To top it off, the control is awesome, the music is incredible, and the variety in this game is actually about as diverse as it can get. So why is it at number 22? It's freaking hard! Just like Aladdin and the Lion King and their movie license games, this game will really get unforgiving for new players as soon as the second level starts. I'm a hardcore player and usually enjoy these experiences, and I do love Toy Story, but man, as soon as the crane machine comes in along with Sid's room, even I have to admit that's when I start losing some lives. It's definitely a fun game, and I highly recommend trying it, but I won't lie that the trial and error is strong with this one like many classic video games used to have. Now this is one of the best mystery games I've ever played, but that is a subjective opinion. Scooby-Doo Mystery doesn't hold your hand at all. Read my lips. At all. This game is incredibly flexible with how you can interact with your environment and items, and it should be for a mystery game. If you're a fan of Scooby-Doo and a huge fan of exploration and wanting to solve a mystery without any hand-holding, pick this up. You'll love this dangerously underrated game instantly. Now the reason I have it at number 21 is because after you complete both of the episodes, the replayability of this game pretty much goes down to 0. I also should warn about a negative with this game. Because this game has no hand-holding and no hints, it can get incredibly cryptic at quite a few points, which is to be expected in these types of games. If you can't figure something out after a long period of time, don't be afraid to use the guide. Unfortunately, I had to for a couple of moments in the game, but definitely check it out if you enjoy these point-and-click adventures. I promise you'll have an absolute blast playing it. Now this game I can recommend for casual players or for anyone generally. The game's story revolves around a witch kidnapping Minnie to steal her looks, so Mickey chases after her to the Castle of Illusion to collect the 7 gems. These are scattered across a few worlds contained within the castle. Everything's easy going, it's not a fast game, it's easy to control Mickey, the music is immersive, and the variety of environments and enemies is vibrant enough to keep the interest going. Now while the game doesn't have any difficulty spikes, like a faithful video game should do, it will get harder and harder the farther you go, so don't go thinking it'll fall backwards and let you walk all over it. I recommend it for anybody who hasn't tried it before, or heck, to anybody who hasn't played a video game yet who is starting out. Out of the 25 Sega Genesis games here, in my opinion, this is the easiest out of all of them. I was thinking about putting the second or third one on here, and to be honest, they're built a lot better gameplay wise, but there's something really charming about the first one I can't put my finger on. Oh, nostalgia, how dare thou pop up again to blind my judgment. Just like any other side-scroller beat 'em up, the rules are simple. Just beat the crap out of every group of enemies that appears on screen, then fight the boss at the end. The reason I like Streets of Rage more than other beat 'em ups is because it feels more fair. Like with Golden Axe, I find myself questioning hitboxes all the time. It's hard, but enemies and bosses aren't invincible and you can find their weaknesses. The only complaint I have towards Streets of Rage is that it isn't well built for harder difficulties. For example, your character will automatically grab enemies when you get close to them when you don't want them to, exposing your character for big beating. This is why it's my number 19. It's a great game, but it definitely starts rearing its ugly head with controls when it comes to crowd control. I actually like this one a lot better than the NES version. For one, it's a lot faster. 2, you can choose which weapon to use out of 4 instead of being at the mercy of whichever weapon power-up you pick up. And 3, you have 4 different characters to choose from who each have their own unique arsenals of 4 weapons, meaning there are 16 weapons total in this game, not something the NES version can boast about. It's not all sunshine and rainbows though, as the Sega Genesis version still has the you get hit once then you do your famous backflip death animation with only 3 lives. It's definitely an amazing game to play, but I have to admit I don't play it for very long because of how unforgiving it gets. So do what I do, look up the code and get more lives just like the NES version. I promise you'll have a lot better time. Honestly, realism is really stupid in video games, and this is one of those big moments. Once the code is put in, it's now my number 18 game. I never, ever play sports games, but this is one I play because it does what other sports games don't. Cartoon violence. I watch Tom and Jerry quite a bit and I adore slapstick. So naturally, since I like Tiny Toons, I can't get enough of this game. The premise is simple. You can play soccer and basketball with a lot of characters, and each character has a unique ability to knock other characters senseless. What seals the deal for me is that it's frantic and carries a risk versus reward mechanic. Each character has a stamina meter which drains from their special ability or if they get hit hard, slowing them down. I can't recommend this game to everyone as I think it takes a very specific mindset to enjoy something this childish, but I'm a kid at heart. It's boring being an adult, so I say bring out your inner kid and kick some heads in. Out of every Sega Genesis game on this list, this is the one I hate the most. Have you ever had those video games you loved and hated so much at the same time? This is one of those cases. Obviously I love it enough to put it at number 16, but it has some nonsense I happen to not like from video games. The AI is exploitable and annoyingly predictable. The AI cheats with money, and over time the repetition of this will really drive you up the wall. So what are its positives? It's honestly an awesome concept. The goal of this game is to destroy your enemy's headquarters by taking bases for yourself for income to buy better units, then penetrate your enemy's defenses. You can't attack the base yourself. You are required to buy units to do the damage to the enemy's HQ. Also, while the AI is idiotic, it is compensated for the 4 different handicap levels, making the enemy start out with better gear than the last difficulty. With 8 levels and 4 different handicaps, there are 32 challenges to complete, making it a really long game, and it's very fulfilling. I only wish the AI was competent, making it really patience trying to sit down and play this game through again nowadays. Zombies Ate My Neighbors is one of the best survival horror games out there in my opinion. For one, it has this cheesy charm. Using water pistols to kill zombies or using soda pop grenades is really something to snicker at. Second, it's a different experience every time. This game drops random items and weapons everywhere, so it's a game focused on improvising with the equipment you get, meaning amazing replayability. Third, it has a 2-player mode, at which no one will say no to that splendid feature. What I appreciate a lot about Zombies Ate My Neighbors is that the game increasingly makes things harder for you to improvise around, making the survival aspect of the game completely brilliant. You sometimes have to think outside the box to get around some threats and traps, though I have to admit, it's a really tough cookie of a game. I think it's around levels 20 to 25 where the game starts to kick me in the face and gives me the game over. Especially with having to keep 10 survivors alive throughout the entire game. That part is a little overwhelming. Still an awesome game nonetheless. There's a huge controversy between whether the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis port is better. And that's fine if anyone likes the Super Nintendo version. Warren, I'm talking to you. I know about that video you and Mike made last year to tear apart the Genesis port, and I say, you have every right to share your opinion just as much as anyone else, and I respect your views in thinking the Super Nintendo is superior to you. For me, I played both to the end, and I honestly like the Genesis version a lot better in every way compared to the Super Nintendo. The graphics allowed for way more thorough level design and variety, and the sword added more engagement to the combat, and I'd much rather have that than an Aladdin from the Super Nintendo, who frankly gets really boring and annoying to me because in that game, he jumps so much to the point of it getting really redundant because that's all he does. Plus, to me, the fluidity on the Genesis is a lot better in getting things done. The music sounds leagues ahead of the Super Nintendo, and the harder difficulty made the game much more memorable. I guess many are into the Super Nintendo, and I completely respect your opinion. But for me, I honestly had a lot more fun with the Genesis version. Tazmania is one of the strangest games out there because it involves very fast movement with very erratic platforming and environments, at which I have to admit, it makes the game very questionable in its execution. But darn it, it's one of those mechanics that doesn't work at all for other video games, but it's absolutely hilarious when Tazmania does it because it suits its style perfectly, bringing out the charm of this game to the brim. Even my dad plays this game, and it's the only Sega Genesis game he likes to play. That shows its staying power right there. But even though I adore this game and I happen to be immune to its problems because I played it so much as a kid, which is why it's at number 13, it has those problems for others. The biggest one I should point out is that it hits a huge difficulty curve in the middle of the game and it stays there for the rest of the game. Think of it more like a difficulty slope. Trust me when I say this game gets absolutely insane with timing with at some points, and I am not kidding when I mention that. Overall, I recommend trying out the first half of the game where it's easy going, and if you want to go on further than that, I'll leave that part up to you, but I will not take any offense whatsoever if the game starts to crush your soul after that. This is a dangerously underrated bullet hell shooter game. Have you ever played Gradius where you lose your power-ups on dying in these types of games? It doesn't happen here. As soon as you lose a life, you can pick yourself right back up, dust yourself off, and keep going, which is a massive positive for this game. Also, the controls are fantastic. There's no difficulty spikes. Well, considering its bullet hell nature anyways. You can shoot backwards and forwards, and the music is extremely catchy. However, I do have a massive negative for this game that doesn't age well at all to today's standards. The frame rate chugs a lot. Whenever a boss or a lot of activity comes into the screen, the game isn't well optimized to handle it. I happen to not mind things like that, maybe because I got desensitized to it playing this game, but it could work to your advantage too. If the game slows down with it being a bullet hell game, it becomes a lot easier to dodge enemy attacks. Ah darn, I think I'm fighting a losing side to the war, aren't I? Well, bottom line, if frame rate drops happen to not bother you and you like what you see, definitely give it a shot, but otherwise, that's okay if you don't like it. But it's definitely a blast and one where the positives pull through to making this my number 12 game. Jurassic Park sure has its share of games across the 16-bit platforms with varying levels of success, but after playing the finicky original on the Genesis, the Rampage edition is a godsend to fixing the problems in that game. Jumping, movement, and the weapons are a ton more fluid. The level design is 100 times more immersive and forgiving, and overall it has fun stamped on it from front to back. It doesn't stop there. You can choose to be Alan to fight off enemies with ranged weapons, or be the Raptor for getting up close and personal, and both feel great to control and get the handle of the situation at hand. I think what made this game unique to me is that I remember being so disappointed with the original version when I was little when I rented it, and I don't know if the creators made this version to make up for it, but either way, if you turn a frown on a kid's face upside down with the better follow-up version, it leaves an unbelievable impression on a kid's nostalgia about a great game. Starting off this top 10, we have Dynamite Headdy. Pick this up. Pick this game up right now. Oh my gosh, this game is unbelievable. The variety, the charm, the control, the mechanics are so perfect, it just makes me Treasure, the developer, knocked this game out with a home run, and that baseball hit someone's window going beyond expectations. That's how much I recommend this game to you. Alright, so what this game is about is a guy named Headdy who can disconnect his head to attack enemies or latch onto objects. But what adds the icing to the game is that Headdy can transform his head into a lot of different power-ups, adding a lot of diverse weapons to his arsenal. Add that to the massive variety and practical ways you can move around this game with the levels, along with some great bosses, and you have an epic game on your hands. I urge you to at least consider giving it a try. There's a lot of potential for some fun here you could really be missing out on. You know the reputation this game has, so I know I don't have to go far into explaining what this game is. It's hard, like one of the hardest Sega Genesis games in existence because of the impossible learning curve and demanding gameplay. But being a hardcore player, that's why I adore this game. You know, I've never talked about that ever about myself. Why do I adore hardcore games like Battletoads but also casual games like The Sims at the same time? I'll talk about that in my #1 entry. You'll see soon enough. But I do understand the other side where gamers want things easier. Sometimes you work hard at accomplishing something else in other parts of your life and you want to play games just to relax and have a good time. I have that side too. Sometimes when I work hard at videos like these or have a long day at work, I have to go for a more casual game like The Sims or play games where I don't want to think a lot. I completely understand where some will adore Battletoads and some others who will definitely say it's not a game for me, and I completely respect that. But for me, I love this game. Okay, it's the charm. It's definitely the charm that rockets this game up high into my charts. And it's also the only Sega Genesis game I play with my brother, Jeffrey, so it definitely gets points for that. So, Altered Beast is actually quite a flawed game. Bad enemy placement, very questionable hitboxes from the player and enemies, and the options menus are hidden from you when you boot up the title screen. Just a heads up for any new players who want to try this out. So the gist of the game is simple. Your character needs to collect 3 ores from these blue pig creatures, and they transform into a monster, giving you amazing abilities to wipe the screen of enemies until you reach the boss. And that's really all there is to it. It's a really fun, flawed mess of a game, and I never hesitate to play it again when I get the chance. Again, it's another one of those instances where my nostalgia more than makes up for the flaws I know this game has. But you know what? It's my #8 game, and I adore playing it whenever I can. Sonic the Hedgehog, with it being my first video game, taught me something about video games that stuck with me forever since I played it as a child. Have fun with video games and look to the positives. That slogan stuck with me all my life with video games. Treat them like toys to have fun with. Don't invent problems with video games just because the popular choice says so, unless it comes to personal tastes, at which everyone naturally has. Now I'll talk about the Labyrinth zone, my favorite zone in the game and where this applies. This is where my individual thoughts trumps popularity mindset came from was this. Nowadays the Labyrinth zone is panned by a lot of people in that the game breaks its pace with Sonic speed, but my 6-year-old mind didn't care at all because I was fascinated with the change of variety with the mechanics. I think changing things up is a wonderful thing to do in a video game rather than keeping it to one single pace the entire time. I wanted to keep that mindset with me when the internet came out, to play and enjoy video games on my own terms rather than let the world tell me what I should worship and hate for my video games. Just like Sonic the Hedgehog 1 and 2, what else is there left to be said about the third entry? Except arguably the biggest amount of content you could possibly get from a Sega Genesis game. Up to 16 zones, you can play as Sonic, Tails, or Knuckles, Super and Hyper Sonic, and as promised, the variety and immersion can't get any more real here than what is brought out in Sonic's iconic finale of a 2D Sonic game from the 16-bit era. I cherish everything about this game. The awesome speed and platforming, the music, even the small things like the elemental power-ups and bonus stages, and that Tails can even fly in this one. It's one of those packages you've come across and it feels complete. No problems, no criticisms, no cutting corners. The Sega team really went nuts with the execution of this game, and for that I can safely say this is my favorite Sonic game out of the 3. Oh yeah, we're not done with Sonic yet. There's still 2 more games on this list. Battletoads isn't the hardest Genesis game on this list. This game is. In fact, it's the hardest video game I've ever played in my life.
Checkpoint!
Lotus Turbo Challenge is the hardest racing game and quite possibly the hardest video game in existence I've ever come across. Yes, you heard that right. I've come across this game in my childhood and it faded into obscurity in my mind. Then I looked it up about 5 years ago and I am obsessed with wanting to beat this game someday. And I'm almost there. I only have 1 level left to beat. So you can see this game is extremely high on my I will annihilate it someday list. Trust me when I say that hardcore gamers have lists like those. I don't recommend this racing game to anyone except for crazy, hardcore lunatics like me. It is the most brutal of the brutal. 1 life, no continues, really tight time limits, plenty of randomly placed enemy cars to make your life hell. Obstacles are merciless, 8 levels flooded with intense difficulty increases per level, and turns are extremely unforgiving. But the reason I love it so much compared to other hardcore video games is because the control and mechanics is absolutely golden. So no random crap from the game is getting thrown at you. It is entirely up to your 2 hands and your intense reflexes that will win you this battle. Plus, the blast processing of the Sega Genesis is at the top of its game in this entry as well. It's an extremely smooth looking game. Now I'm assuming that I just horrified a bunch of you. Good. Because this game is literally the hardest video game I've ever played in my life. I'm not putting sugar on this. Even Battletoads is kids play compared to what this game offers. So yeah, if you want to try it out for yourself, well, I won't stop you. You know what you're signing up for. The reason I have this so stinking high is because of the personal staying power. So these top 4 Sega Genesis games are games I absolutely adored as a kid with the Sega Genesis and find myself still playing quite a bit even today. They're the games that aged the absolute best and never, ever seem to get dull in any way, shape, or form in my many years of playing it. I personally think every gamer has those games where those precious gems never stop being precious, and Space Harrier 2 is the first to showcase for my special 4. Space Harrier 2 is one of those into-the-screen shooter games to shoot enemies and dodge obstacles, but the music, even though it's repetitious, is the catchiest song I've ever heard in the Genesis library, and it complements the boss battle music and flow of the overall game really well. The gameplay and controls are joyfully ace and it never interferes with the enjoyment of the game. Hey, listen to this death animation. It's brilliant.
Get ready.
To keep the positives going, the enemies, bosses, and formations have a lot of variety to it, keeping the game different from one level to the next. I just can't find a single thing to ever have a complaint for this game. It's in my top 4 special games for a very good reason. And you thought the Sonic games were done, didn't you? So to be frank, I'm not a big fan of those original arcade games of Tetris or Pac-Man, because the concept just feels a little basic to me. Not bad games, just too basic for me. I adore these types of games that try to expand on something simple and make it better, and I can't help but come back to this game constantly for splendid execution. For me, it's Tetris being expanded on with steroids. The campaign is legendary, and I love that it isn't the same experience every time with the different opponents. Matching up batches of beans to attack the opponent while defending yourself from the onslaught becomes extremely addicting. It's one of those concepts where it does so freaking much with something so little to talk about. Every time I boot up a Sega Genesis or Sonic the Hedgehog collection or anything related of the sort, I always play this game first. I just have to. It's just that great! So you guys must think I'm trolling right now, but please listen to me. Please listen to me. I'm dead serious in saying, yeah, you're totally right. I just pulled the rug out from under you. My actual number 2 entry is Sonic Spinball. Just like Mean Bean Machine and Space Harrier 2, this is another title that hasn't lost a single trickle of nostalgia since my childhood and has aged fantastically for me. But why should it? Isn't it just pinball? And frankly, I don't even like pinball that much. I think it's because of the charm that this is an expansive pinball adventure game with the incredible controls and unpredictable playthroughs that soars this game so high for me it heads into space. And also, just like Mean Bean Machine, I find myself playing this game way more times than I can count whenever I get the chance to, but it just never gets old to me. What's funny is that this game only has 4 levels, but those 4 levels are just so well designed, and it's pure eye candy to watch Sonic maneuver through the levels. I think another reason is because I want to enjoy other pinball games, but they're so unfair because the balls go wherever they want. But here it feels stable and really fun to guide Sonic because you do have a little control over Sonic through the air. Other reasons is that I like physics games, I like the themes of the levels, I like the scoreboard narration, I think it's charming, the bosses are cool, the music is fantastic, and the reason I think I come back to it often is the same reason I do with Star Fox 64, because it's a short and sweet game and I can do a quick playthrough of it whenever I feel like it. While nostalgia and other childhood factors do admittedly contribute a huge portion to why I adore this RPG and consider it my favorite RPG of all time, there's also another reason. It's the longest Sega Genesis game I've ever played, which is what gives it the big leg up from other Genesis titles because you can enjoy this game for a very long time. Shining in the Darkness also does so many things in what it avoids doing and what I dislike from the usual RPGs. The brutal difficulty stays consistent, which means the grinding is kept at a safe distance on the back burner since you level up as you progress through this dungeon crawler. Each character levels up nicely with a huge variety of spells, keeping the gameplay fresh, entertaining, and the battle system customizable. Plus, each party member plays a vital role in the party, so they aren't cookie cutter characters. Like Zombies Ate My Neighbors, there's a huge survival aspect that keeps your heart pounding to keep your party alive, because your magic can only last for so long, so it's a game that involves thinking ahead. Now, is this game easy? Oh no, it's not. It's also arguably one of the hardest RPGs I've ever played, and it's brutal. You have to adapt fast to the new enemies that come frequently. This is also the video game that transformed me into a hardcore gamer with the rewards that come from it as a kid. And you want to know why? When you struggle against something for a long time and then you feel that fresh wave of satisfaction when you finally beat something, you want more of it. And Shining in the Darkness just keeps doing that in every section of the dungeon for you to complete, putting in hard obstacles that makes you feel like a god when you overcome them. And that's why Shining in the Darkness is my favorite Sega Genesis game of all time. Overcoming challenges that feels out of your reach at first and then make the goal to finally conquer those moments and actually do it is a great feeling indeed.